Okay, I may need to stop periodically to let people in the room, but thanks for being here. Again, a couple of you just joined us. This is our annual financial overview. And it's about our SCSB financial portion of the Charter School Accountability Framework. And we are going to get started in just a second. Just got some people to admit. Okay, so far everyone who has joined is in, so we will get started. All right. Oops. Oh, all right. I clicked the wrong thing. All right. Well, I think we're going to get started. Hold on. There we go. Okay. So our charter school accountability framework, the financial portion of it is what we're talking about today. There are 6 primary metrics to the financial portion of the charter school accountability framework, and there are 2 secondary metrics. There are 3 short-term metrics, 3 long-term metrics, and 2 that are short-term and long-term. Somehow I have a little thing on there and it's distracting, but I'm not going to take the time to figure out how to get it up, so we're going to keep going. Short-term metrics. So we have the 3 of them are the unrestricted days cash on hand, which is used for tiering purposes. We will talk a little bit about the tiering later. And then we have, as a short-term metric, deficit/surplus. That's also used for tiering. And then there's the debt default. So we're going to talk about each of those 3 individually now. The first one, the unrestricted days cash on hand. The evaluation criteria for that is within the framework is that it be greater than 60 days or between 30 and 60 days with a positive increase from the previous year. And the reason we did that is because it used to be evaluated on 30 days. And we didn't want to just go from 30 to 60 days and shock everybody. So we put that intermediate one in there so that schools that have at least the 30 days, as long as they're increasing and working up to that 60 days from year to year, then they will meet that criteria. The formula for the metric is cash plus cash equivalent minus restricted cash. And that is divided by total operating expenses minus depreciation expense. The next one is the deficit surplus metric. The evaluation criteria for this is that it be greater than 0. And the formula is revenue minus expenses. The next one, the debt default. The evaluation criteria for this is that the school has not defaulted on loan covenants or is not delinquent on debt service payments, and there's no formula for that. Then we have our long-term metrics. These are total margin, debt service coverage ratio, and material audit findings. Again, we'll go through each one of these individually. Let me let some people in. Real fast. All right, so we're going through the metrics on the Charter School Accountability Framework, the financial portion. We are now looking at the long-term metrics. So we'll start with total margin. The evaluation criteria for this one, because it is a long-term metric, it's a little, there's a lot to this one for that regarding the evaluation criteria. So there are 2 ways you can meet this metric. The first one is that your most recent year total margin is positive and your aggregated 3-year total margin is positive, Or the second way you can meet it is that your aggregated 3-year total margin is greater than negative 1.5%, and the previous year and most recent year total margin is positive. So there are several formulas that make up the main formula here. So the total margin, the formula for that is change in net position divided by your total revenues. And then there's the 3-year aggregated portion of the formula that's calculated by taking the sum of the 3 years change in net position and dividing that by the sum of 3 years total revenues. And then for the 2-year aggregated, the same formula, only you're using 2 years. And then the change in net position is calculated as total revenue less total expenses. Let someone in again. Alrighty. The next metric is your debt service coverage ratio. The evaluation criteria here is that this be greater than or equal to 1.1. The formula for this is change in net position plus depreciation plus interest expense plus rent or lease expense. And then the total of that is divided by principal payments plus interest expense, and then plus your rent or lease expense. Then your material audit findings. The evaluation criteria here is in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, the audited financial statement should have an unqualified opinion. It should not include material weaknesses, and the auditor should have no concerns about the school's ongoing viability. And obviously, again, no formula on this one. Now we have those two metrics that are considered both kind of long and short-term metrics. That's the facilities ratio and the salaries and benefits ratio. The evaluation criteria for the facilities ratio is that it be less than or equal to 20% of revenue. And the formula for this is operations and maintenance plus your rent lease payments plus your annual principal plus your interest, and then all of that is divided by your total revenue. Your salaries and benefits ratio, the evaluation criteria for that is that it be less than or equal to 60% of revenue. And the formula for that is your salaries plus your benefits divided by total revenue. The next thing I want to get into is the tiers. So we have 4 tiers so depending on how you land within, as we evaluate those metrics, depending on how many of those metrics you meet, you will land in these tiers, of which we have 4. The first one is the new school. The new school, this one really isn't based on the number of metrics you meet so much as it is based on if your school is in the first 2 years of operation. And the reason that we do this is things like your cash on hand are going to be affected. We should evaluate it differently depending on how new your school is, because it does take a while to build up those cash reserves. So as for things like that, we just evaluate things a little differently based on a school being a new school. The next tier is meets expectations. What this means is that the school meets all but one of the 6 primary metrics that we talked about. The review is the next tier, and the school falls here if the school meets all but 2 of the primary metrics. And then the next tier is the active engagement. And this one is a school, the way a school gets into the active engagement tier is that it does not meet 3 or more of the 6 primary metrics, or based upon other information received, it's considered the school is considered to be an active engagement school. So if we are looking at maybe those secondary metrics that we talked about, the debt service coverage ratio and the material audit findings, based on what's on those, we may move you. If you're in review, you may be moved to active engagement or something that we found there. All right. So those are our metrics. And so I want to move into the results of us looking at your metrics for the fiscal year 2025. So we are doing we look at your metrics twice. We look at them in what's called a preliminary evaluation, and we do that based upon UPEFs from the AFR and UPEFs. Even though you fall into what's called these review and active engagement criteria, you may not hear from us, even if you're in one of those with regard to the preliminary evaluation, just because it's kind of new and we're trying to figure out how we're using it. So you may or may not hear from us based on it. But that's our preliminary one is based upon that UPEF's AFR. So this year for fiscal year 2025, we did the tiering. We put all the information into our financial accountability framework, and this is how the schools landed in the tiering. So there were 102 schools that were used in the tiering. There were a couple of schools that were they were in their pre-op year, and then there were some mergers of school or some transfer of operational control in some schools. So there were a lot of different things going on. So by the time we got all that situated, we evaluated 102 schools for fiscal year 2025. So we had one new LEA within that tiering. The schools that fell into the meets expectations was basically 80% of the schools. In the review, there were 4 schools, and then there were 17 schools that fell into that active engagement tier. And one thing that I forgot to mention with the preliminary evaluation, obviously we're not doing the debt default or the material audit findings because we don't have any availability to that information until we receive the audit reports. So in the preliminary evaluation, it's just based on those 6 primary metrics. Okay. So let's look at how everybody landed based on the metrics themselves. So the missed metrics by LEAs, there were, for the unrestricted days cash on hand, there were 6 schools that missed that metric. The deficit surplus, there were 16. Total margin, there were 16. These kind of go hand in hand, so that makes sense. Debt service coverage ratio, 13 schools missed that. Facilities ratio, 15 of the schools missed that. Salaries and benefits ratio, 58 of the schools missed that. Now, something I want to say about these 2 last ones, the facilities ratio and the salaries and benefits ratio, these kind of play off each other. If one of them's high, just letting another couple people in. So talking again about the facilities ratio and the salaries and benefits ratio. If one of them is high, because they kind of play off each other, then we would expect the other one to be low. So you're kind of balancing these off of each other. So when we see that 58 of the schools miss that salaries and benefits ratio, that's probably not an issue unless they're also missing that facilities ratio, or if their salaries and benefits ratio is extremely high. So not unusual to see that many schools missed that metric. Oh, I always forget. Gotta click back on here. All right. So the preliminary evaluation, again, based on the UPEF's AFR, I wanted to kind of we looked at those by how many schools missed the metric. So I wanted to kind of look at it by what tiers the schools that missed a metric were in. Just kind of seemed interesting to me. The one that the new school missed, they just missed one metric, and obviously that unrestricted days cash on hand. And we talked about why that would be the case. The next one, the schools in the meets expectations, only one of them missed the cash metric. And then the rest were pretty much in that salaries and benefits and facilities ratio. And then in the review, there was again only one school that missed that metric. And then there were two that missed the debt service coverage ratio, three that missed the facilities ratio, and then salaries and benefits ratio, there were two there. For the schools in active engagement, 3 of them missed the days cash on hand, 16 of them missed both the debt surplus and the total margin. 11 missed the debt service coverage ratio, 7 the facilities ratio, and 11 the salaries and benefits ratio. Now we'll look at the final evaluation that we did that was based on the audit reports. The missed metrics by the LEAs here. Oh, well, we'll just go on. Okay, so the final evaluation, the missed metrics by LEAs. The unrestricted days cash on hand, there were 8 schools that missed that metric. The deficit surplus, there were 14 schools that missed it. Total margin, 16 schools missed that one. And then the debt service coverage ratio, 12, facilities ratio, 40. So that went up quite a bit, and we'll talk a little bit why that would happen when we look at the next one. And then the salaries and benefits, 57 schools missed that. All right. So final evaluation based on the audit report, missed metrics by tiers. The new schools, there was only one that missed the there was only one new school, and it missed that days cash on hand, just like it did on the other one. For the meets expectations, the schools in that tier, the unrestricted days cash on hand was only missed by one of the schools. The facilities ratio by 15, and the salaries and benefits ratio was missed by 34. For the schools in review, 2 of them missed the unrestricted days cash on hand, 1 total margin, 4 debt service coverage ratio, 15 facilities ratio, 12 the salaries and benefits. And then that active engagement, that is where you see those high numbers of missed metrics. So 4 of them missed the cash, 14 the deficit surplus, 15 the total margin. Like I said, these go hand in hand. If you do miss the deficit surplus metric, you're going to miss that total margin metric, but it doesn't go the other way. You could actually, because it is a long-term metric, you can miss total margin, but not miss the deficit surplus one. Then 8 of them, the schools missed the debt service coverage ratio, 10 the facilities ratio, and 11 the salaries and benefits ratio. And I will get to your questions at the end, just because I'm trying to do everything. So I will get to them. Thanks. Okay, so we'll move on from this one. So I wanted to put these side by side so you could actually kind of see what it looks like. And I apologize for some reason, the scale, we're a little bit different on them, but still we can see what's going on. So we can see that the salaries and benefits ratio, they're the same. I'm actually short a school, which means I missed something, because they should be the same in both the preliminary and final evaluation. So somewhere I just kind of miscounted something. Now, as you can see, the facility ratio, the number of schools that missed that went way up between the UPEPS evaluation and the audit evaluation. The reason for that, I believe, is 100% depreciation, because we use the figure for operations and maintenance in our evaluation of this metric. While we do try to take into consideration depreciation when we're evaluating the UPEF metrics. So we do use a number, we use the number actually from the last year's audit report for depreciation when we do it, just because it's the best number we have. Although sometimes it's really good, in some cases it's not a good measure. But for facilities, when you have the audit report, a lot of depreciation for schools is included in the facilities, but depreciation is included in other places as well, or sorry, operation and maintenance of facilities. And there's no way for us to know exactly how much is in that facilities, operations and maintenance. So when we're evaluating it for UPEF's purposes, we don't take into consideration depreciation at all. So we're aware that that's an issue as we're looking at these, but that's why there was such a big jump in that facility ratio under UPEFs as compared to the audit. And then the rest of them were all really close, as you can see, to what we evaluated when we looked at UPEFs. So that was nice to see. Now I put the missed metrics side by side as well. Again, you can see where those facilities ratios, a lot of the schools fell into that, or a lot more schools were in that for the audit than were in it. And I forgot to mark those as audit and UPEFs, but before I'll send them out, I will mark it. So the UPEFs is actually on the left, the audit results are on the right. Okay, again, you can see that a lot of those schools in the meet expectations categories and well, all the categories, they actually jumped a lot more schools into that facilities ratio. And then you can also see before there are several more schools that are in review, and that if a school, we know that more than half of the schools missed that salaries and benefits ratio. And if we had a lot more move into where they missed the facilities ratio, because they can only miss 2 ratios, that would bring them into the review tier. So that's why you'll see a lot more schools in that review tier as well under the audited financial statements review and or evaluation and the evaluation that we did on UPEFs. So just kind of interesting to look at, but you can see that pretty much the other ratios, there wasn't a lot of change in them between the UPEFs evaluation and the audit evaluation, which, like I said, that's good. That's what we were hoping to see, that there wouldn't be a lot of movement in those tiers. All right, so I just kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about how the tiers changed from the preliminary evaluation to the final evaluation. So there were 9 schools that went from meets expectations into review. And like I said, a lot of those probably had to do with that facilities ratio. The 3 schools that went from meets expectations to active engagement. And again, that could be the facilities ratio too, because that's going to bump it up 1 more. So if they were already, well, actually, we're talking 2 levels. So it could be that not, I have a little bit of reasons down here. I'll wait till we get to those. Okay. And then active engagement to review. There were 4 schools that went from active engagement to review. Okay. So reasons for the differences. Like I said, biggest one, depreciation in that facilities ratio area. Then I noticed as I reviewed what was going on, I noticed that cash that was restricted for debt service is not accounted for as such in UPEFs. I think there are actually a lot of schools that don't do that, but there is an account within the, let's see, you have revenue, expenses, and net position. Okay, the net position, there are some accounts within net position, or there is one that you can use to account for your debt service restricted funds. And if you're not doing that, I would recommend that you would do that. It just gives a better idea of the reality of the school. It will help us more in our evaluation as well, so we gotta get a better number on that. Another one was not being able to identify bond issue costs in the audit report. Sometimes when there is a bond reissue or payoff and reissue and you have those costs, they all generally go into that interest account that you have on your audit reports. Sometimes we can find the amount that was for the bond issuance costs within the budget. It's reported there. But in some cases, we can't determine what the bond issuance costs are. So all of what's reported in that interest account goes into that interest field for our evaluation purposes. So that will affect how you land on some of these metrics as well. There were also large differences in the amount reported as principal repayment in UPEFs and the audit reports. Honestly, I can't think of a reason why that would be the case, but I did notice it in several reports. So honestly, I don't know how to tell you to fix that, except to please make sure that your principal is being properly accounted for, because those numbers should match fairly closely between what's on your UPEFs report and what's in the audit report. And then there were also some large capital outlays that were misreported in UPEFs. So when we were evaluating, when we were adjusting for property purchases, which we do, we try to back those out because they are not an expense. So if we use anything that involves your expenses, if that number is available, we try to back it out. If it's not properly reported, then it's not going to be properly evaluated. Then our secondary metrics, we have two of them. They are the debt default and the material audit findings. We had only one school that was identified as having a debt default. There were 3 material findings that were found. One of them was a qualified opinion. The other 2, we had a cash reconciliations were not being done in a timely manner. So that was a material audit finding. And then there were one school had some leases that were improperly accounted for, which led to a material audit finding. I did actually want to talk a little bit about the other audit findings that we had too, just so that you can be aware of where schools are missing metrics and kind of remember to think about them as you're preparing your financial statements. There were 4 significant deficiencies that were identified. One was a school that had a low debt service coverage ratio. There was another school that was improperly tracking its assets. So there were some assets that could not be found. They were not capitalizable assets. They were smaller assets. It didn't identify exactly what they were, but there were some items that when the auditors were looking, they were unable to locate them. There was an incidence of fraud, and there were some errors in beginning balances. What that was attributed to was there was one school that they did not close their books in a timely manner. So after the audit was completed, there were some transactions for the 26 fiscal year that went into the 25, that went on the 25 fiscal year's books. That's what I got out of what it said. And so that threw off the beginning balances in the audit reports, or not in the audit report, but in their financial reporting for the audit. Okay. And then other audit findings. So these were other matters that were noted or compliance issues. 3 schools did not send out the parental portal notifications. There were 5 schools that failed to get the proper crime insurance. This is one I hadn't seen before, so I'm not sure if that crime insurance is something that's new, but there were 5 schools that had that. And then this was interesting because we really, in the past couple of years, we've been really good on our budget compliance issues, but there were 8 schools that missed it this year. So just want to make you aware about that and think about it. Some of the reasons they had this issue was they failed to have a budget in place at 6:30, like the schools are required to do, Or the other one was, at the end of the year, there were it's, let's see, your budgets, there are some items you're not supposed to go over on your budgets, and I guess there were schools that had significant overages within their budgets that, hey, you need to spend in line with your budget, so they got dinged on that because they weren't doing that. At the end of the year, if you're in that situation, you should really go back and amend your budget and make sure that you are within those guidelines, and just some schools that didn't get that done. There were 2 schools that had findings regarding school fees. They didn't really say what those were. I'm just assuming they didn't, based on the new guidelines, or not guidelines, but the new laws about how what school fees can be charged. They must have not been following those laws, so they got hit on that. There was one with instructional materials. I'm not sure about the details on that one. There were 2 schools that had missing policies. So again, just make sure you're getting your policies in place. There were 4 schools got hit on the late deposit. One of these schools wasn't necessarily that they had late deposits, but because they did not have adequate documentation regarding their deposits for the auditors to determine if the deposits had been made in a timely manner. And the other 3 schools, it was that they were making them late. So the rule is that you have to get them deposited within 3 days of receiving the funds. So keep that in mind and just try and make sure you're following those rules. And then there was a school, again, did some board training. I guess they missed some board training. I didn't really get much more information on that one. So I believe you're still required to do 3 board trainings a year. So make sure those are getting done. All right, audit findings in relationship to the accountability framework. So I just kind of wanted to let you know talk about how these audit findings fell, kind of like we did the metrics. So there were a total of 35 audit findings. The number of school or LEAs with audit findings was 30, which is about 29% of all the schools. The number of schools that had 181 audit finding were 26. There were 3 schools that had 2, and then 1 school had 3. Audit findings by tier, the new LEA did not have any audit findings. The schools that fell into the meets expectations group, there were 14 that had audit findings, which included 1 material audit finding and 1 significant deficiency. There were 6 schools in the review tier that had audit findings. One of those was a material audit finding, 1 was a significant deficiency, just like the meets expectations. And then the active engagement, there were 10 findings for the active engagement schools. The default was found for an active engagement school, which is not surprising. They also had 1 material audit finding, and the other 2 significant audit findings were on the active engagement schools as well. And actually, for the schools that had multiple findings, all of those were on the active engagement schools except 1. There was 1 school in the meets expectations tier that had two audit findings, but they were just compliance findings. All right, and the last thing I want to talk to you about is metrics that you might find when you go in and look at how you landed on the accountability framework, which Smriti will talk a little bit about how we're gonna let you know when it's ready. It is pretty much ready. We just had we did find, this is a new financial framework that we're using, and we're doing it through UCAP. And so we just built it out. And so we're working out some bugs still. So you may find something when you go in and look at it that it doesn't look quite like you want it to, or what it says it should be, that you're finding, hey, it says that I should have met this and I didn't, or something like that. It's just because we have some bugs. And I think we're ready to send out the email and let you know. But like I said, Smriti will talk more about that. And I forgot to tell you, Smriti DeCall is with us as well, and she's going to talk to you about a few things as well. Okay, so with that said, if you find that your debt service coverage ratio, if you look at it and it's evaluating within the hundreds of thousands of dollars and you don't know why that is, well, basically the reason for that is because you don't have any debt. So for the formula, there's no denominator if you don't have any debt. So we put a 1 in there so it evaluate properly. So it looks very strange. And that's why that is. Another one is your facilities ratio evaluates it over 100%. Well, the reason for that is generally that maybe you had a where you refinanced your debt. So you paid off all your debt and received some new debt. But when we're looking at it, we include your debt payments in the facilities ratio. So if we don't know how much of that debt was actually for just the regular repayment and how much was for your regular bond or debt payment, then we just use what we have. So, and we're aware of it when we see that, we're aware of that too. We understand where it's coming from. So when we're looking at it, we will take that into consideration, but that's why you might see it at over 100%. And the last one is your total margin. I was looking through the schools and I noticed that total margin, there were a couple of schools that had a large number, over 20%, which is unusual. And I think they might have been negative. I can't remember. This one I haven't figured out yet, but I will figure it out. And when I send out all the materials to you, I will let you know why we're seeing that. Because there's nothing coming to me intuitively, and I unfortunately didn't have time to look at it, but I will. Just wanted you to know that is coming. All right. So I'm going to have Smriti start in just a minute, but I just want to quickly look at your questions. I know I had at least one. So let's see. Has the board considered the metric for salaries and benefits might be too restrictive? We had a board member who wanted this one in there because it was important to the board member. And so as we were putting this together, we put it in and we have and honestly, when we're looking at it, as I said before, when I look at it, I'm thinking of it in relation to facilities and salaries and benefits taken together. So my feeling is, even though you missed the metric and it puts you in a different tier, and so that Smriti's going to talk about that in a minute, but I'm just going to say, don't worry too much about it. We know, like I said, over half the schools miss this metric, and maybe after, like, this is our first year where we've really done this. So after we're showing the results, maybe that'll be something that we decide to change, and maybe like my suggestion was that we consider those in tandem at 80%. That's an idea. And when I say those, I'm talking about salaries and benefits and facilities. We don't know, but we have talked about it. I understand what you're saying. And based on what we see this year and next year, maybe we might make a change in that one. Okay. And that looks like that was my only question that I had. So I'm going to turn it over to Smriti Tikal. She's the audit finance manager. I'm sure most of you know her. And she's going to talk about kind of, now that we have this evaluation, where we're going to go with it. So I'm going to stop sharing so that she can go ahead and start. So Smriti, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Hello, everyone. So basically, I'm here to discuss, the expectations moving forward, based on the financial framework that Lisa just presented, that we have adopted starting last year. So, based on the framework's results, some of you may fall into the active engagement tier, and I just want to emphasize that it is not a cause of concern at all. This is simply part of our process and an opportunity to check in, understand what's going on in your LEA and determine what support may be needed. So in many cases this may be as simple as a brief quick phone call, so, and because the goal is to ensure that schools not meeting expectations receive appropriate and timely support. So that's what, as we are putting these frameworks together, yeah, just and yeah, whenever you think, you see yourself falling in those categories, just be aware that, we are here to, we might reach out to understand this your situation, that's going on within your LEA, and just see how we can help you support or navigate, through the situation. And one more thing I'm going to talk about is also that we will be pushing out an email soon, letting all the LEAs know that, the frameworks are ready for review, and, and um, please, reach out if you have any questions again or concerns in that regard. But there should be a general email that we should be pushing out shortly. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Smriti. All right, that is all I have for today. Our next meeting is going to be 4 weeks from today, and honestly, I have no idea what it'll be on. So if you guys have any ideas, I would love to take the opportunity to have you send me that, and we can get a training going that you would like to see. I hope this was informative. I did a lot of kind of just letting you know how things were, and I remembered when we had talked as we were putting the framework together, a lot of schools were interested in seeing how they compared to other schools, which is kind of why I just wanted you to know how everything fell together and see what it looked like. I hope it was helpful. And we do in April, I wanted to say we do have fall finance training. I believe it's April 13th. So we will not be having an April meeting, so that you can attend that without having to worry about taking another hour out of your month. And I believe that's all I have. I appreciate you guys. I will get recordings out to you. Hopefully in the next few days. It's been a crazy year. So have a great month, and I'll see you later.